Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Joseph Shapansky, and today we're going to be hopping into an ethnic studies topic, actually, more specifically, a sound studies topic pertaining to the idea of colonial parallels in everyday workplaces, contemporary workplaces. So, yeah, just give a little background on this. It's like kind of the idea, especially through sound, is how can we hear maybe like hierarchies that are paralleled through other institutions that have existed in the past that are now deemed morally and unethical in terms of practice. So we're talking about things from like the colonial era, stuff like plantation and whatnot, and then something that I want to subtly prod at through this presentation is this idea that I don't think these kind of things stop at just comparing it to like 100 or 200 years ago. I think there might have been like some perpetual recycling of even like a serfdom or caste system that we are still experiencing to this day. It's pretty much just under a different name or branding. Um, but without further ado, let's get right into the presentation. So I'll break down the field sites for the research here. It was mostly pertaining to places of work, service industry places of work. So like movie theater, restaurant, cafe, um, those kinds of things. Like a place you go to get some service. You know what I mean? But like yeah, the potential scope isn't limited to like particularly any one of these industries. It is, and in the West, more particularly in America, it's common that wages are already like very disproportionate for the kind of work you have to do in these tasks, and it's expected that the wages are made up in tips usually, which becomes the responsibility of the consumer instead of the company taking care of their own employees, which is a whole other issue. But just gonna keep the ball rolling on this. So yeah, the idea is that these soundscapes are very coalesced, and even though some of the industries might be vastly different, like a cafe or a movie theater or a restaurant, um, that through the soundscape that they have, it it exposes like a more colonial hierarchy that is present in all these things. So some methods, our primary methods right now we got going on. We got some audio recordings to listen to and dissect, and I'm gonna coordinate them with some roles in the hierarchies that I think are connected. And then also participant observation. So that would be myself observing the environment, and I'm going to maybe briefly glance at my field notes throughout this presentation to kind of give a more anecdotal experience of this whole concept here. So our research question, a primary research question here is going to be this first one, but I wanted to include the second one. I felt that it was really important, and maybe these two could have been combined into one research question, but I feel like they're distinct enough to stand on their own. But the first research question we're going to be tackling here is, can we hear echoes of colonialism in everyday service industry soundscapes? Pretty much what I just went over in the past two slides here. And then one thing more importantly that might pertain to some more intricate themes we've gone over in the ethnic studies course this semester is literal hierarchy in the soundscape, like through sound and like their sounds. Okay, if that makes any sense. So who gets heard, who must listen, and how is a hierarchy of sound enforced? So pretty much like how is sound gate kept and how is sound used to either oppress a marginalized group already. Um, I'm gonna go into some more specific themes here. Allow me to just move my camera real quick. I've noticed that might be in the way. Let me go ahead and check if that really got in the way. No, looks like we should be good. So, I'm gonna go right here to the themes. Oops, sorry. I'm hoping that that is all right. over there in the video. So anyways, we're back into the themes pertaining to the ethnic studies course. And I'd say noise pollution and how it connects with hierarchy is one of the like big focuses here. And then obviously decolonizing listening. From this perspective, I mostly wanted to take the idea of like how it's biasly thought of, where it's like, is this soundscape even normal? Yeah, it is normal, but because we live in a colonized state, pretty much. Like it's normal because it's been enforced, it's been institutionalized that that is the norm. Like think about it. Like if you go out to a restaurant in Waikiki, right? Say like Cheesecake Factory, you go down to a nice John, having a good night out, and you're gonna be exposed to this service industry of the clanking and the banging and the toxicity. That soundscape might not be present in the lobby, but go take a walk to the bathroom, walk to the bar. You know what I mean? Like you're going to be able to hear things from the service industry soundscape. And what's important to think is you're not going to think anything of it. You're not even going to think of the fact that that's happening in Waikiki at the Cheesecake Factory. Like, where in reality, without this Western infrastructure that came about through annexation, arguably colonization of Hawaii, but I'm not here to talk about the semantics and nuances in history at the moment, but Waikiki used to exist solely as a huge lo'i almost, so like very important and integral to the water system and the food supply of people. So like if you were walking in Waikiki theoretically without this institutionalized infrastructure, then and you randomly came across like a building with a restaurant with metal pans and whatnot, like it would be very jarring. Like see if I have this in my field notes here. So because we're accustomed to it. But if you were to like naturally peruse through here, through the given culture, it's like the purpose of food isn't for service, entertainment, like money. Food is a very communal thing. So there wouldn't be this toxic work environment of seniors and juniors arguing and bickering with each other. There are just people doing their job at their pace in order to help the community. And just completely different work dynamic and completely different soundscape. And then the last thing I want to throw in here is surveillance and how are the managers always watching us? Because okay, sorry for the abrupt cut, but here we're going to go ahead and listen to some of these sounds. This one is the managers.
Hello. Come on, break. Break.
So the main things I want to highlight in this sound clip is going to be the difference in the soundscape going into the manager's office, how it's much calmer, much more controlled, and then also particularly would like to note the use of the walkie-talkie and how that's significant because that's how they communicate with the rest of their staff. There's a physical disconnect. Now I'm going to go ahead play the role of supervisor.
It's like 7 minutes after close, and we have zero progress on the popper. I need you to get on that.
They like kind of just took my drawer, and I just had to do stuff. I would
Alright, we'll get on it, bro.
If you could just give me like 2 seconds.
Get on it, bro.
Alright. So that's sound clip from there. One thing I want to know is just the tone and how the employees interact with each other in that situation. We go the fellas. It's kind of a working title, but this is gonna be your average guy, your average working guy, your average working gal. The workers, the men and women running the front lines here. And I'll save that one for a second. Just regular work environment stuff.
6, 7.
6, 7. Conversation between workers, which is something I'll get into a little bit.
Oh, she wanted in that fancy
Significance
cup.
of the communication between them. Then here we can take a look at this other soundbite from a restaurant, a poke restaurant, which is going to more or less dig into the idea of the intimacy between the workers and how that's important. So maybe I'll hold off and we can listen to this one in a second. And then here's just some general soundscapes of service industry work environments. Metal clanks and bangs, industrial sounds. You can hear
So cute.
the sounds of
Thanks.
machines, refrigerators,
You ushing?
Huh?
You ushing?
Pretty much. Industry and two people hanging out. What it all comes down to, I guess. So, make sure I'm on the right tab here. So we did our themes, we did our sound bites. All right, so now we're gonna get into these three roles here and why they are significant for the presentation and how they echo a hierarchy, a colonial hierarchy, through how their roles are carried out. Shoots. So I'm gonna start with the manager position. I figured this was gonna be a pretty good one to tackle. Make sure I'm still recording real quick. Here we are. There we go. So, the manager role is kind of defined by their distance, silence, and surveillance of the people. So managers inhabit a soundscape like we just listened to of insulation. They're seated, they're enclosed, they're in an air-conditioned space. They got nice, comfy chairs. You know what I mean? They're not out there working hard, working fast. Very slow and stoic, I guess, is a way to put it. And they're largely shielded from the actual soundscape of the floor, of the working floor. So this thing is huge for me because not only in like a literal like comparison of roles in terms of function compared to a colonial hierarchy do I find similarities, but in the literal soundscape, how they isolate themselves from hearing the same sounds as their underlings. They're above that. They don't have to hear any of that hullabaloo. They don't even have to hear like what you're saying. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter to them. But yeah, so this separation produces a form of sonic privilege, the ability not to hear, the ability to not hear. And the gap is deeper when considering how their communication with staff is often disembodied. And this is huge because they communicate with their staff predominantly through the walkie-talkie. It's not even a face-to-face conversation, just like a God-sent message. But, and here we got this mirrors colonial governance structures where authority operates from a distance, extracting information while remaining unaffected by sensory labor conditions below. Silence here is not absent, but power. And then we're going to move on to, or a quick note on the whole surveillance thing. So the manager's role of surveillance is talked about in the Sound Studies blog post, especially pertaining to post 9/11 surveillance state, considering that blog post is talking a lot about like airports as well, which is a very large area of service industry workers. And I think the excessiveness of things like TSA and airport security post 9/11 obviously is extreme, but it echoes the microcosm of the rest of the service industry, because if they can keep track of their workers like this, and that in the airport, who's to say that a manager can't do the same thing in a restaurant? And why would they not want to do the same thing? And then we're going to move on to this intermediary role of like supervisors. So their tone is in discipline. So supervisors occupy an intermediary sonic role. Unlike managers, they're not. They are physically present on the floor. They're there on the front lines. They're leading the goons, so to speak. But their authority is expressed through tone. They have to be stern clipped and often even almost instill like a hostile vibe to the rest of the staff in order for the authority to be respected. And of course, the authority is trickled down from the managers, anyways. And this role resembles colonial intermediary figures who translate top down authority into immediate discipline. Sound becomes corrective rather than communicative, and maintaining hierarchy through voice alone in this age, however. Resistance implies impending doom. So you maintain the hierarchy through like your tone of voice with the other employees, and not going along or adhering to that tone could potentially lead to you losing your job, you losing your lifestyle because of that. And then one thing I really think is important to note here is I think these are too little roles to really compare with a colonial hierarchy. I would say the manager role is that I'm pointing out here in this kind of closed case is more comparable to like the actual CEOs and owners of the company. Even the managers, to an extent, are a victim of this almost serfdom hierarchy. But just to keep it more cohesive, we're going to close the loop here and just show how it trickles down even at the lowest end. So now we get to finally the workers, the bottom of the bottom, the bottomest of the barrel. Noise, intimacy, and survival is what defines these guys. Because they are in it. They are in the soundscape. They are in the clanking and the banging and the kids in the background and the families coming in and they are out on the floor in a hectic soundscape already, under a lot of scrutiny, under a lot of pressure to perform and do their job to the best of their ability. So the workers, the bottom line workers, they inhabit the densest of the soundscape, which is comprised of conversations, industrial machinery, music, jokes, shouted coordination, and there's this idea of shooting the shit or talking story amongst service industry workers where you're kind of just kicking it. You have a quick conversation, you guys go out for a quick stogie real quick on a 15-minute break, exchange a few words, get back to work. It's just what it is. It keeps you going. Humans are social creatures. As a psychology major, I can assure you that the most effective mental health is maintaining good socialization with other humans, actually. But in the grander scheme of the hierarchy, talking story with the coworkers means nothing to the higher ups. It's just more noise. And then like I said, I was going to loop back to this because, like I said, it's these shared moments of intimacy that the workers can really find and claim agency in the soundscape that they're in. Oh, I muted it. Quick. This is a sound clip from a restaurant that I was working at called Tropic Poke on the west side. I briefly did an analysis on this earlier in the semester, but where I think most of the conventional Western world would see like a security guard practicing his ukulele as, not fit for work or whatever. And to argue that, I think it's just another moment of us reclaiming agency in the workplaces that we're in, kind of, yearning for some kind of freedom or control over our life for happiness and joy, where in an ideal world, we do not have to put up with minimum wage just to make rent and all the things that come with that. But I think another thing really important to highlight in this one is the security guard who is practicing their ukulele. You can hear right at the end of it, his walkie comes in and he's got to get back to work. All right, let's get back into it. And then, I'm going to go over these direct comparisons of each role. So, sorry again. We got the camera moving about. I'm just going to cover the title here and tell you the title. So, Colonial Hierarchy Through Roles. So we got managers, most directly comparable to colonial governors, plantation owners, imperial administrations. They ruled from elevated enclosed spaces, rarely exposed to physical conditions of labor, and exercised authority through messengers, overseers, and written or spoken orders. They really didn't even talk to the actual workers doing anything, unless it was to impose some form of like authority. And then silence functions as privilege again, we have here, and then sound travels upwards. The soundscape from the rest of the environment is filtered. Really only any sounds from those environments come up to them when it is summoned, when they allow it, when it is permitted by them. And then here we go to the supervisors, the intermittenary kind of role. So we have colonial overseers, foremen, intermediary forces, overseers on plantations, indigenous or lower rank colonial intermediaries tasked with enforcing order, positions between rulers and laborers. Supervisors operate as mobile enforcement agents, again, to just kind of impose the will of the manager class, so to speak. And then, so workers, this would be more comparable to enslaved laborers, indentured servants, colonized subjects. So enslaved or indentured servants who, their bodies were governed by like sound commands, almost even like a Pavlov's dog kind of thing, which is like really sick and twisted if you think about it. And then anyway, so expected to labor with dense, chaotic soundscapes. If we go even to like a plantation kind of example here, if we do go to a local kind of example for Hawaii, you can go to like a sugarcane plantation. So that was dominated, by the sounds that would be of plantations, like machetes, chopping, all that stuff. Several different like ethnicities working together, and so penalized for unsanctioned noise. So then I kind of skipped over this because I thought it was the other one, but yeah, those with the most power listen the least, and those with the least power are required to listen constantly. And so yeah, and then also like I highlighted in the last slide is just for the sake of this instant. This is a closed comparison with the managers, supervisors, and workers. Ideally, I would relate a quote unquote plantation owner role more towards like a corporate official. But just so you get the gist of it in this, and like, we could definitely keep going and expand on this. But that's going to be it for this today. These are my comparisons. And thank you for coming back and joining in on the show. And these are going to be some works cited here. Awesome. Thank you guys. Have a good night.